Okay. Tonight we're going to talk about, oops, can you hear me? Hear me now? All right. Talk about multi-axis turning. It's also known as off-center turning, but the way some people are using it anymore, I think multi-axis is a little more descriptive of what people do. I've got this book. It's written by Barbara Dill. She's done thousands of turnings on different multi-axis turnings, and she wanted a systematic approach to how you might think about that kind of turning. And first I'll just show you, these are some of the things that she's done here. And those. And you see this one here where the balls are way offset from each other on that disc. Just amazing kind of stuff. And so most of what I'm going to talk about is some of her ideas on how she thinks about multi-axis turning. So she has a website, she has a book, and she has a website. She also has several YouTube videos that go into this in much more depth than I'm going to go. Another person that does a lot of this kind of thing from the AAW Symposium in Louisville, Kentucky, where Louisville Slugger is, he made bats. He originally, this is, pardon? Mark Schiffery. He is a furniture maker, and he makes tables and then makes legs that are all wonky. But for the Louisville Symposium, like I said, he made a series of bats. He also has a website and YouTube videos. And the third person I want, now this book has lots of different turnings and different turners in it. They just do amazing stuff. But I wanted to talk real quick. Derek Weedman. If you ever get a chance to see one of his demos, he'll stand in front of the audience. He says, give me an animal that you'd like me to make. You say, an owl. And he'll take a chunk of wood, and he'll put it on, he'll turn a little bit, he turns it again, turns a little bit, turns it again, maybe a dozen times or more. And when he's done, you go, wow, that looks like an owl. Just amazing guy. I don't know how his vision sees these kind of things, but I don't know if you can tell. This is a lion face here. We got a crab, woodpecker, the woodpecker here with the branch of wood, and then he's got this one he calls Pan. And he does most of this on the lathe. He does also do carving to get some of the features a little more defined. But like I said, if you ever get a chance to see him, it's amazing. And he also has at least one YouTube video, and he has a website also where you can see a lot of the things that he's done. Any questions there? Okay. So, like I said, Barbara Dill wanted a way to think about offset turning. So she came up with a few ideas. Basically, she says there's two different ways you can, two different axes that you can use to do your turnings. You can do it parallel, where if this is your center line on your piece of wood, then you go 1 to 1 parallel to the center line, or 2 to 2 parallel to the center line. That's one of them. If you don't do it parallel, you're going to do it twisted, what she calls twisted, which you can see if this is the center line, you would go 1 to 2 across this way, or 2 to 1. Or you can take one point on one side and again go to 1 or to 2, and again your axes aren't parallel to that center axis, and it gives you a twisted shape. Questions? I'm trying to go through this kind of fast because I don't want to bore you to death. So then she ends up with 4 different quadrants. So you can have a parallel arc, parallel circular, twisted arc, twisted circular. And the arc and the circular part are, if you look at this, you can obviously see that these are arc-type shapes in here. So that would be an arc-type shape. This, even though these are V cuts, it's an arc-type shape. And this one has bead cuts. It's an arc-type shape. And if it's harder to see where some of these might be arcs, if you would cut it down through the middle, you take a turning like this, cut it through the middle, and you can see that it's arc-type shapes on either side there.
So, Teresa, how much offset do you have off the center on that? How much offset is on that? Half an inch or a quarter of an inch, or how much?
It's kind of what I feel like, but
Well, you must be able to tell by looking at it whether it's
Yep.
an inch or half an inch. Or
yeah, the farther you go off center, the less wood, in some respects, you have to work with. And you can see, actually, okay, so my center and then my 1 and my 2, those are about half an inch or less.
I was just wondering, proportionally to this size of piece of a material, how much offset you had on it, and I knew it couldn't be too much because that's not very big diameter. So.
Yep. So no, it's not very much. The other restriction is you want to make sure that your center ends up on solid wood, because as you crank in on the center, you don't want it to chip off the outside there. But for most of these spindles, you want it fairly close to the center.
Do you ever glue bigger bases on, because if you glued a bigger base on on each side, you could then go out.
Yeah, you can do something like that. But you don't want it too far offset unless, now, if I'm doing something like this, I want it as far to the outside as I can get it, so I get a more defined twist. Now this would be a parallel, but twisted. Twisted centers, not parallel, twisted centers, and it uses 3 different ones, and it's an arc shape. Yeah.
Is that one from 15?
Yes.
One of your first ones?
Yeah, it was one of my first ones, yep. So, the other one was circular, and you can see these, I've gone down to a cylinder, so that if you did a cross section of this, you would see circles. So that's where they get the circular part. So I'm going to show you. Oh, let's see what I want to do here. Oh. So you can see on this one, I've got several different centers. I got the center, then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'll show you what a difference it makes on how far away from center you go. So if I go parallel, so I'm going to go my 1 to 1. The faster you go, the smoother your cuts are. the less sanding you have to do, the less open air you are turning. So I would, if I was actually going to turn this, I'd turn it up real fast. But I also want to show, it does show up on there. When we're doing this, we're turning what Barbara Dill would call ghost wood. And what she means by that, yeah, if you look here, it looks fairly solid. But out in here, you feel like you can see through that wood. So that's the ghost wood. And this out here that you feel like you can see through is what's actually closest to your tool rest. So that's where you're actually cutting your shapes, is in that ghost wood. So that one is wonky enough, but if I would go out to my number 3 here on both sides. Yeah, I'm not going to do this very fast. So yeah, you can see it. You can really get a lot of movement. But if you're going to go all the way down to the circle, well, you can't really see the ghost wood as well on that. You would have a very small bunch of wood by the time you got down to a circle.
How much danger are you in turning something like that?
You're between centers, so it's pretty safe because it is captured. If you get a catch, yeah, it can break out. I would not suggest that anyone that's not real comfortable with turning beads and coves and getting a good surface, you may not want to do it until you've practiced a lot, and practice beads and coves first. And because you are getting that wood, as you're turning any of these things, you need to push down on the tool rest and not try to push in. If you push in, that's when you're going to go into the airspace, and then the wood's going to come around and smack it. So you have to have a gentle touch, too.
Teresa, would you go across corners so we can see what that looks like across?
Yeah, I'll do that in a minute, okay?
Do you recommend any size of lathe? For example, you probably wouldn't want to do this on a mini lathe or anything? You'd want to come down here?
You could do it on a mini lathe, but smaller things probably.
Okay.
You'd, 3 to 4 inches is probably about as big as you'd want to go anyway, unless you use some special jigs or something.
What kind of tools do you use?
Spindle gouge or detail gouge if I need to get into real tight spaces. So if I went 1 to 2 on here, I'm still parallel to the center of the lathe. But you're going to get a lot now. Let's see. You can't see. Okay, yeah, you can see that. So the ghost wood is up in here. And then you see where it goes solid, and then you've got more ghost wood over there. So this is 2 centers, 180 degrees apart. So I'm all along a center line that I drew there. If you want to go to 3 centers, so now I have my 1, 2, and 3, and on the other end I have actually 1, 3, 2, because this number 3 is opposite this number 3. So in the same axis. And you really want to mark your axes and things and get a system of marking them, because you may need to go back to those centers and do a little touch up, or you may want to go back and duplicate something and you forgot how you did it. So it's real important to get a system of how you mark things. But again, if I went 1 to 1, 2 to 3 to 3, you'd get the same kind of thing we saw before. But if I turn these then, actually it's going to look the same as it did before, but I'll go, my system is to go from 1 to 2 first. So again, you just get that wonky feel. So I'll go 1 to 2, then and do my turning. Then I'll go 2 to 3, and then the third time I'll go 3 to 1. So that that's where I end up with a shape like this. That's 3-sided. I don't know if I get it right. You can see it's 3-sided. And it's got a twist to it.
Did you hollow that first?
No, because I had my centers on here. But then you can, once you've got this turned, you can put tenons on either end and hollow it just like you would anything else. And I've done demos on this before, so that's why we're not talking on that kind of shape today. Anybody wants to come down on Monday, we can show you how to do those kind of things anytime. And there's a lot of YouTube videos on doing this. Oh, and by the way, this black, I use that when I'm turning, and maybe you've already seen that it gives you a good background where you can see your shapes a lot easier. And you can use this with any of your turning. It makes a big difference to have a solid background that you're looking at, as opposed to looking at the floor, looking at the bedways, looking at wires, looking at your wall. This gives you something that gives you a lot better background to see what you're doing. Okay, so this one, yeah, I'm on 1 to 1. So this was started out as one solid block, and I did V grooves. They're 1 inch apart. These green, you can see the green lines, they're all 1 inch apart. So I went from the green down to the red in a V, 1 inch apart all the way across on one axis. Then you go to the number 2 axis. And you move everything over 1/2 inch. So now my reds, I'm going to go from my reds down to the green, and I'm making V cuts all the way across. You see that? So then when you take it out, you have that kind of a shape. And we'll pass that around.
Are you cutting just the ghost wood?
Yes, you're cutting the ghost wood. And you can cut it past the center line actually, but you are cutting in the ghost wood because that's what's closest to your tool rest.
Teresa, what is this shape called that you just painted up? Is there a special name?
Well, no. Now that one is parallel, it's not twisted, but well, we can do twisted ones later. Now this one, the same idea or similar idea. I turned the beads first. So on my number 1, I turned these beads here. And then when I go to my second axis, I shift everything over halfway, and I'll turn a bead where this, well, I'll turn it around and show you. And this is where you might have to stop quite often and say, what was it I was supposed to do there? Because everywhere where I did a bead before, I'm going to make the top of the bead here. Top of the bead here is going to be the bottom of the bead that I turn once I move it. So again, it's moving at half a distance, just like that other one was. So I'm turning the beads here and going down where I can see. Can you see that? Yeah, you can see that. So I have to look and see where this is at its highest. That's where I want the top to be at the low, or want the ghostwood to be at its lowest. And where this is at its lowest, my ghostwood is at its highest. These cameras work neat. I like the way it shows it off pretty well. So I'll pass this around. These are all marked. This is parallel, meaning parallel axis, arc type cuts. Then the centers are 180 degrees apart. Oh, let's see, what else do we have here? Now, this one is like the box that I made, but here again you can see that it's an arc type cut, but you've got 3 arcs there. So they're done twisted. This one is twisted. You can see by the curved marks here, but it's a arc cut. What time's it getting to be? Oh, we're doing all right.
Teresa, do you mark depth on your tool so that you know not to go past a certain depth, or how do you determine how deep that arc is going to be consistent between the twists?
If for these I didn't. I just made beads as I was looking at them and tried to go the same depth, and then turned it around and went until the lines met each other. When I'm doing something like this, yeah, I'll be in one axis and I'll find the deepest part of my curve. I don't know if you can show that very well, and put a mark on my tool as to how deep it is from the tool rest. And then when I go to the next axis, I'll try to go to that same depth.
And you just keep your tool rest in the same spot?
Yeah. Once you get the tool rest set, you can, and your centers are all the same distance from center, then your tool rest should be good for all 3 turnings. They're going to end up the same distance from the tool rest when you turn it. Okay? Oh, what did I do with that circular one? This one. All right, so this one has, oh, let's go to the headstock. No, let's go to the tailstock. Has 3 centers on it. And this one is parallel. I'm going to go 1 to 1. So what I'm going to do on this one, I'm only going to turn this section in this axis. And I'm going to turn it down until it's round. Then, when I have that, I'm going to go to my second axis. I got it in there backwards. For what I'm doing, for what I'm showing you here. 2 to 2. So I turn that first one. Then now I can turn the second one down to a cylinder. I can go to my third. And this is where you really want to stay fairly close to the center, or these get very small, and then they don't have much of an overlap. Now I can do the third one. the same thing. And then if I go back to my number 1 for the fourth one, I can turn it, but you can also see that because it's the same number 1 axis as the first one I did, they both are round down to the center there. Questions?
On that one, was there some reason you didn't turn 1 and 4 at the same time?
Yeah, because, well, that could be one reason, but in case I didn't end up at the right spot for the fourth one or something like that, because I'm turning them, they're supposed to be about an inch apart, but you know, if something didn't quite work out, you might end up wrong. So yeah, okay. Oh, what else do I have here? Oh. This actually shows you, started out with the centers out quite a ways, and you can see, oops, if I put it down here, you can see that that first one is pretty narrow, and I thought I wasn't going to have enough wood to make the rest of them, so then I moved to a center that was closer to the center to do the rest of these, and then I made that one that looks a lot better. Okay, this one is just 2 centers, 180 degrees apart. And I'm going to go down to where it's circular. So I went down to a cylinder, and then I turned a bead shape. And you can also see, by the time I got to this third one, I did the same thing. I was back on that number 1 axis. But then when I went to number 2, so I went down to my cylinder here and then turned my bead. And then I went back to number 1 to do the third thing on here.
Is there much danger in hitting your fingers? Or?
Yes. You have to be aware, plus, that when you're actually doing the turning, let me go ahead and do that. What you want to do is keep your hands on the far side of the tool rest and never go across the tool rest. That way you should be all right, or the wood would hit the tool rest, right? Any other questions?
Teresa, do you
Yeah.
do sanding whatsoever, or is it just the tool?
Oh, yes, you have to do sanding, and you have to do hand sanding, because you want to keep these crisp lines. If you tried to sand on the lathe, you would round all that over and you would lose it. And it's really not that hard to do. I was going to do this later, but I can do it now instead. I'll show you what I use for sanding. You can still do it when it's on the lathe, just not when it's turning. So I'll either use sanding blocks like these, and I'll have 2 or 3 of them with different grits on them. They work pretty good because they're a little flexible. Or I'll get dowels of different sizes, and then I'll get Velcro from Menards. You can put the Velcro on so that you go across the end. This is good for inside straight boxes and things. Or I can put it in the middle of something like this. I can hold it on both sides. And actually the sanding goes pretty fast. And then I'll try to match it to the curve that I've got. So I might want an even smaller one for this curve, or I can use this bigger one for the bigger curve. So those make it real easy, and you can get 2 or 3 of these and have 2 or 3 different grits, and then you don't have to keep changing it. You can use the circular pads that you get with Velcro on the back, and just use the Velcro. You don't, otherwise you have to buy some kind of Velcro backed, or well, you could use the stick-on stuff if you want to mess with getting it off later. That's always a bad part of that. Any questions on that?
Do you have a preference of wood? Do you have any woods that are better to do the multi-axis?
Well, the ones that cut the cleanest are going to cut the cleanest here too. Like a soft maple sometimes gets a little fuzzy, but it also sands faster. So, and generally you want fairly straight grain, either fairly straight grain, or you want something with maybe a burl or something where the grain doesn't matter that much. You can see on this one, I've gone pretty much straight grain. This is pecan with walnut base. I tried a pecan base first, but there was too much, it was too busy between the grain lines on the base and the grain lines on the bottom of the turning here. It just didn't look right. So I went for a contrasting one instead. And I did do the, like a goblet on the top of here. You would usually, you're best off to do the goblet first, because once you get all this done, it wobbles a lot to try to hollow out the goblet part of it. I did that on this one. I had a heck of a time. It's a box. I had to use a center steady, and you know it was terrible to try to hollow that. So the other thing I could do is make this part separate and then put it into the base later, which is probably a better way to do it. And the same with the base here is I put a tenon on there to go into the base of this. Okay. Got one more to show here. This is twisted circular. This is what we're going to turn later. You're actually going to see me turn something, but I figured it would take way too long to turn all these shapes up here. So this is more what we're going to do next month. It's twisted axis with circular cuts. Let's see, which is my head. Okay, and this one, I've got just the one center on the headstock end, and I have 3 centers on the tailstock end. So I'm going to go first to my number 1. And again, I'm going to come in from both sides until I get a cylinder in the middle, and then I'm going to turn my shape on the cylinder.
Teresa, what is that dead center that you've got on the lathe? Is that a special?
The
Yeah, right.
drive center, it's a steb center, and it's the smallest one they make. It's 1/2 inch around, and I use those especially with the ones where I'm way off on the edge, so that I can go further and still have the center on there. You know what a steb center is?
No, I've never.
It's well, you can see it pretty well there. Might be able to see it better against white. It's got little teeth around it, and the center point is spring loaded. So the fact that it's small means I can go pretty far out to the edge and still be on the wood. And then it's also a little bit safer in that if you get too bad of a catch, this should spin rather than catching hard and throwing something. That's the idea anyway. Okay, then my second set of turnings, I did this in the center, down to a cylinder, then made my bead. Then on the third one here, now I'm keeping this center the same, but I'm changing my centers out here.
Are those 120 degrees apart?
Yes, they are 120 degrees apart. So on this one, by the third one, I'm doing a V cut in there rather than going down to that cylinder, although I go down to where it's pretty much of a cylinder down in there. And then by the time I go back to one, it's the same thing you've been seeing, kind of. But again, I'm just doing a V cut in here. Okay? And this is what we're going to do next month. So, let's see. Pardon me? You're right, the tool handle. If you want something a little more, yeah. You want to do something a little more practical, you buy tools unhandled, you turn a handle, turn a shape that feels pretty good to you. But if you look at your hand isn't actually round. It's got kind of some sides to it. So if you turn on 3 different centers, you actually get a better feel, better grip. It's more comfortable, and also if you set it down, it's a lot less likely to roll off the table. So and these, once you get this shape, you put it in here on your angles and zip, zip, and you've got one side done, zip, zip, the next side. And so it's real easy to do. And like I said, they feel good. So we can turn that. And if we have time, I can actually do that, but we'll see how the rest of this goes first. Yes, those are 3 centers. It's 3 centers, but they're parallel. Yep. So I think we're actually ready to turn something. So I didn't want to bore you with turning a square down to a cylinder, so I already did that part. But I'll put it between centers here. Oh, and with this background here, if I go to walnut or something, I can always put a white sheet of paper on there, and I'll get the contrast that this black wouldn't give me. But the black works real well with the light-colored woods. Okay, so I'd put my square blank in here and turn it around. Then I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to run it from one end to the other. And that's just going to give me a place to mark my centers on either end, that I make sure that my center lines are the same on either end, because I'm using that mark as a reference. I'm going to put a little tick mark there and there. Then I'll take a straight edge and go from that mark right through the center. You see what I'm doing there? And I'm going to make my center line across. Ooh, I missed it. I missed it. And do the same thing on this end, except hopefully not miss it this time. Then I'll decide how far away from center I want my next centers to be, and I'll get a compass, and I'll set it up, and that's probably good there. And we'll draw a circle, or you don't actually have to do a circle, you can just mark the intersection there. And those intersections are going to be where my centers are going to be for my turnings. Got that? So I'll take a center punch and punch those. Now I'm going to mark headstock 1 and 2. Tailstock, oops, actually, I should have gone, normally I would take 1, the same as this line, but I didn't. But I do want to go, my 2 is closest to that line, so this is going to be my 2, and this is going to be my 1. Got that? And real quick, I'm going to put this back in the center. And it's not as important with what I'm doing tonight, but especially when you're doing twisted turnings, I want to mark, I don't want to go past there on either end, and that's kind of arbitrary, but I want enough room that I can make a tenon and that I can finish things later, so I don't want my cuttings as I'm going across here to, I want to leave some room to finish things later. So, mark that around. Let's see. And it's also a good idea to go ahead and set all of your centers in tight. So those are my 1s. And then do the 2s. Because if you make your first set of cuts on your number 1 centers, and you get it very thin, then if you try to put a lot of pressure in to set your other centers, if it's too thin, it might crack it. So I just want to set those in there good so they'll drive it good when I move it later. Oops, that's supposed to be the tailstock. So if I go 1 to 1 here, now I can set my tool rest. I want it pretty close, and I want to try to get my tool rest parallel to my piece here, which also hopefully is parallel to the ways. Sometimes you can look at the ways and get this parallel to that. In this case, parallel to my blank is pretty good. So now I shouldn't have to move the tool rest because my centers were equidistant. So even when I change it, I should still be all right to clear that. So I use a regular, or pretty much regular, this is actually a detail gouge, spindle gouge. Sometimes I use one with a sharper point to get into a sharper corner. This one is sharp, and not a sharp corner, but not quite as sharp. But this one can also be grabby. So I do as much as I can with this one, actually. Now I'm going to take and mark a couple of reference lines here. I'm going to go kind of halfway in between here. Halfway and halfway. What I'm going to do, once I start, I'm going to cut those away, so I don't need a big line. Let's see. So yeah, you can still kind of see those. So I'm going to turn a bead in the middle and coves on the two sides. Okay, so I'm going to start down with my down cut first, because we're always cutting from the bigger diameter, larger diameter to the smaller one, cutting downhill. Now, it's how you cut beads. I'd probably do it different than a lot of you. A lot of you probably use one hand and cut from one side and then cut from the other side, turning the tool. I've always found it easier to cut from one side down to the bottom and then switch hands and come from the other side. So you'll see me dancing around a lot up here, but like I said, practice your beads and coves first. I'm basically right-handed, but I'm ambidextrous enough that I'm fairly proficient with my left hand too. And that's a good way to be with wood turning, because sometimes you just can't get where you want to go with one hand. You can even hear how much easier it is the faster it goes, how much less chatter there is as I'm cutting. Okay, so let's shut that off for a minute. So we're starting to get our shape there. We've got our bead down to a cove, up to a bead, and I haven't gone very far there, but you're starting to see the shape emerging there.
Are you keeping your tool flat all the time? Are you twisting it at all?
I'm doing the kinds of movements you would do for a bead or a cove. So when you're doing a bead, you start with your tool fairly open, and as you go down into the bead, you turn and lift the back of the handle at the same time. And for a cove, you come down and you feel like you're scooping. So that's why I'm saying practice your beads and coves first. But yeah, it's just like you would turn spindle turning a bead or a cove. You're just turning the ghost wood, so you've got a lot of air in there too. Okay? Oh, where am I? So I'm looking for smooth curves, and I'm not doing a very good job right now. Ugly. Let's see what we got going here. So we got not too bad, but not real good either. A little bit further here. That's better.
Now we can see that it'd be very difficult without a contrasting background.
Yes. Yep. And the first one I made was out of Mark Schiffery's book, and he had it just flat like this, but it was too wide. I couldn't get close enough when I was doing these short pieces. So I made another one, and I happened to find two pieces of wood that were already at an angle out in my scrap pile. This actually works a lot better. It keeps some of the chips off a little better, And just that angle gives you a little better background. And they're obviously cheap and easy to make.
You should sell him one.
Pardon?
You should sell him one.
Yeah. So, yeah, like I said, I heartily recommend doing something like that for any of yours, especially your small turnings where you're getting a nice shape and you want to really see the shape you're doing. Get a contrasting background like that to do it. You can also, if you're doing a box or something, a small turning, in a chuck, take the chuck out, sit it up, and again get a solid background and step back away from it. And so that you have a solid background so you don't see all that stuff over there. And it gives you a lot better idea of what your shape is. And your shape, as you're turning it here, it'll look different once you turn it right side up and put it somewhere else and look at it. So that's something to keep in mind, not necessarily when you're doing what I'm doing tonight. But. Okay, so now I've gone to my second set of centers. So what I want to do is, where this is a bump this way, I'm going to cut down into it. And where this is down at the slowest part is going to be my highest part. So I'm going to have bead, cove, bead instead of cove, bead, cove. And sometimes you have to turn this on and off quite a few times to make sure you're doing it right. But again, you can see the solid parts here. And what I'm going to be cutting into is this ghost wood up here. So I'm going to come, so my top of my bead is going to be here, down, down, down into here, and then back up. So, okay. Shouldn't really do this, but I feel like I'm a little too high. So I'm trying to look out in here. I'm trying to look at the shapes I'm doing here, and I'm looking at this and saying, okay, I got to be the high point here. So then I'm starting from a high point and going down into the low point there. So I'm doing a little bit of both. I'm seeing where my first shape was, and then trying to do the opposite on my other shape. But you really get that shape from watching out on the outside. Yep. Which is the same thing you do with your regular turning. You're better off not looking at where your tool is cutting, but looking at the shape out away. So where am I? Okay. So if I shut this off now, you can see I'm getting closer, and you can you see where I haven't cut yet? It's a little hard to see because there's not a lot of contrast there, but there's kind of flat spots here where I don't have a nice crisp line. So I'm going to keep cutting until I get that crisp line where the two meet. Go up here. Here's where you have to do a lot more checking because I'm real close in here, but I have to go deeper here. You can see that. It's a little hard for you to see on the monitor. I've got a little bit to go along here, quite a bit to go down in here. There you can kind of see those lines in there. So, yeah. Did I get you? They're small chips now. Okay, I'm good there, but I need a little deeper there. little more off of there.
You're shooting for a sharp edge.
Shooting for a sharp edge, yep. A sharp edge but smooth curves without any lines. Oops. Okay, I'm getting real close. A little deeper there, a little more off of there. Chip. Okay, I'm pretty good there.
Do you ever have to go back to first axis when turning?
If something looks too far off, yeah, you might have to go back. That's another reason to make sure you get good markings on that. But yeah, I've pretty much got my good sharp lines all the way up and down. So then it's sanding, but also I want to do a little finishing on this end. If I go back to my center now, my center axis, Let's get a chip out of there. That's one of the best piece of wood to choose. So now I'm back on the center axis. And what that's going to do is give me a little more finished edge down in here. Unfortunately, I did have some chips come out of there. This wood is a little chippy, apparently. Anyway, that's pretty much it. Any other questions?
Are these techniques explained in that book by Barbara Dill?
Yes, this is directly out of her book. It's an example she used, and actually so is this that we'll do next.
What about the tool handle?
The tool handle I did my own. Actually, David Ellsworth did an article in the AAW magazine on that also. Any other questions?
One thing before we all leave, thank you very much, Teresa. Make sure everyone, if you please sign the sheet that came in tonight. Go back right center again.
A STEB center, S-T-E-B. It's made by Sorby, I believe. They're in the craft supplies catalog. They come in different sizes. This is the 1/2-inch size. They also come in a 3/4 and 1 inch, or some other sizes. But for what I'm doing with this, I like the small one. Yep. And they come in both the drive center and the live center. Yes.